Leslie, thank you so much, and thank all of you for being here. And on behalf of the Ag Biotech group at the North Carolina Biotechnology Center, we extend our welcome to you as well. And it's really good we have such a great turnout today, and there will be folks that will be coming and going throughout the day that they can't have their schedule where they're here all day long, but we've got an exciting agenda. And I think that everybody in here, Leslie, from the way that you recognize the many different sectors of folks in the community and development across the state, there's something in this agenda for everybody today. So it's really, as we look here, as Governor Hunt said, as we move into continued development of ag biotechnology and agriculture into the 21st century, Ag Biotech is continuing to develop a new economic landscape. Farmers, scientists, doctors, they're all delivering new solutions to achieve better health and well-being. Farmland and greenhouses are where food is grown and where medicines and ingredients for functional foods are manufactured from plants. Plants are a critical asset in industry for all of us. This new landscape that we're developing together, that we're really creating, and it's something that is being propelled and being advanced by plant breeding, transgenic crops of all kinds, and all kinds of other new technologies, Governor Hunt, that we hadn't dreamed of years ago. And there'll be many more coming down the road. All of these things make our lives better. On the horizon are solutions to the challenges of feeding, fueling, clothing, and healing the world. And those are themes that you're going to hear more and more and over today. All of these things help ensure our future and our well-being. But right now, it's really my pleasure to be able to introduce to you the person who is to tell us more about technology's 21st century and the role that it has in that building of this new landscape. So today we're going to hear from Bill Weldon, who is Vice President of Global Research and Development and Western European Operations for Elanco Animal Health, which is a division of Eli Lilly. In his position, Dr. Weldon is responsible for Elanco's global research, development, and regulatory operations, as well as the Western European commercial operations. These areas are responsible for the development and launch of new products and solutions that improve the health, wellness, and well-being and performance of animals. In Western Europe, he's also responsible for sales and marketing of Elanco products that he has been working with since 1995. He has served in various roles and has been involved with teams that have focused on delivering innovation and introducing new products to the market all over the world. Prior to Elanco, Bill was assistant professor of animal science at The Ohio State University, go Buckeyes, right? And was a swine nutritionist at Newsom Hybrids USA. Elanco, I think all of you know, and if you don't, you should, has been a very active voice in championing scientific technology as a global necessity for our future. So let's all please welcome Bill Weldon as our morning keynote. Bill?
Thanks, Gwyn, and it's really a pleasure to be here this morning. Thanks to the Ag Biotech Center in North Carolina here for inviting me to come and speak to you all this morning. It's great to be back in North Carolina. From 1997 to 2001, I had the great opportunity to live in Wilmington. I hesitated to tell you that because many of you might be thinking, well, why in the world would he ever move to Indiana after living in Wilmington? The reason's pretty simple. They told me that's where I had to go to pick up my paycheck. Also, some of you are probably glad I moved out of Wilmington. While I lived in Wilmington, we had 4 hurricanes in that short period of time. Bonnie, Floyd, Dennis, and Eileen all visited us, and I don't think there's been until just the last year, it hadn't been any real scarce since. So perhaps I took the hurricanes with me. But real pleasure. What I want to do this morning is actually kind of set the stage and really talk a little bit about making safe, affordable, and abundant food a global reality. My talk this morning is going to be based on a paper that we as Elanco have written and have made available. There's copies back on the table in the back. I'll also show a website at the end that if you want to download one, and there's some other materials there. And also these slides are available for use, and happy to have anyone use these slides in any way possible that can help advance this cause. But when we think about my presentation this morning, I think if you can't write it on a napkin, you probably won't be able to remember it. So I'd like to have you think about two words: technology and choice, and 5 numbers. So 50, 170, and 95 and 4. And these are going to really be the basis of the presentation, and talk a little bit about. We'll talk a lot about these numbers as we go forward. But why is it important to talk about technology, and why should we talk about it now? Well, there's really never been a time like right now to think about agriculture and to think about technology and how it's going to impact the future. We've talked about oil prices, commodity price spikes, food security fears. If you look at some of the political unrest that's happened around the world, a lot of it's based on food security. So if we can't secure a food supply for the population, we won't be able to have a world that we want to live in. Trade restrictions, and I think it's important to look at being able, this is a global economy, a global problem that we'll talk about, and being able to move food around the world is absolutely critical. And then finally, a global recession. I think many parts of the world, we're starting to see some signs here of improvement, but there's many parts of the world that aren't. And I think there's folks predicting that we could go backwards too. So we still haven't been able to shake kind of some of the issues that have happened here recently. So now's the time to talk about it. And in fact, people are talking about it, not always in a good way. So if you think about things that are going on in the news right now, you hear about the huge beef recall that's going on in Canada. You can talk about several things, animal welfare concerns. We all heard about recently the whole, the further processed beef. Actually, in my home state of Indiana, they sent pigs home 2 days early because the pigs had a temperature and they were worried about transmission of influenza from the pigs to the people. Now, I happen to know that usually it goes the other way, and actually the people make the pigs sick, but you can see that, and it's happening, and we see it on the front line. And then all of the things about commercial production of food and the whole idea of energy have been key elements that we see on the front pages of several of things every day, which is different than I think if we thought about in the years past. Often agriculture was buried deep and not something that was talked about a great deal. So this is the first set of numbers that I talked about, 50, 170. So, Governor Hunt alluded to this. In the year 2050, we have 9 billion people. 7 billion people today. In 2050, 9 billion. Those 9 billion people will need 100% more food. Now, because the earth isn't getting any bigger, 70% of that food has to come from technology. We'll get a little bit from cropping intensity, about 20% more, and there will be some more land brought into production, but that's only about 10%. So when we think about this, the things that we're going to talk about today are absolutely critical to feeding a world as we go forward. Let me put that into perspective for you. So that population growth represents 206,500 people every day. Every week, we're adding a new Philadelphia, if you think about it from a perspective of cities in the U.S. 6.3 million people monthly. It's like adding every month Los Angeles or Chicago. So this is an issue. This is, if you can start to see this population growth will have repercussions, and it's going to be something that we have to deal with, and we have to deal with it now. We believe that technology will enable us to deal with this issue, to get to be able to feed this group of 9 billion people. We think that technology also enables 3 rights. It enables food, a basic human right. It enables choice, a consumer right. And finally, it enables sustainability, which is environmentally right. So we're gonna dig into each one of these as we kind of go through the presentation and talk a little bit more about them in detail. But first, you might say, well, geez, is it even possible that technology could meet this problem? And by the way, what do you mean about technology? And what I would say, and when I term this technology, I work for an animal health company, but technology, cuts across all of agriculture, and we need to be able to work together to talk about this whole issue. So technology to me is our practices, products, and genetics. So it really cuts across all of the different areas. And technology enables efficiency. Efficiency drives affordability, and affordability then can hit that last domino of hunger as we think about this around the world. But can we get 70%? Can we double food production and have 70% of that come from technology? I think we talked earlier, people have mentioned the land-grant universities and the importance of the things that they've done. And I think the U.S. is a huge success story. So this is a graph of total agricultural output. So this is across all different segments. And it looks at the total output and productivity compared to our inputs, starting in 1948 and going out here to 2008. So when we look at this graph, actually what we see is in the last, since 1948, we really still put about the same amount into our agriculture. But we have, in that 60 years, 250% of the output. So we've done this over the last 60 years. We've increased food production 2.5 times on the same input. So it is possible. And then the greatest, if we think about how this is played and how bringing technology to the agricultural sector has been able to allow us to be in the position that we are now and have the type of food costs that we enjoy in this country, it's really quite remarkable. And it's a pattern that other countries, I'll share a little bit later, are really trying to copy. So let's dive into food. So we often sit around in groups like this. We had a great buffet of food this morning. And really, we can lose perspective of how food plays in other parts of the world. But there really is a wave of global hunger. Hunger is still the #1 cause of death in the developing world. Lack of food kills more people than war, AIDS, malaria, and tuberculosis combined. And on a daily basis, 25,000 deaths per day occur worldwide from hunger. So this is still a real issue. And, we might stand here today and say, well, isn't this really today more of a distribution issue than it is an actual production issue? And yeah, there are some issues with that. And we need to be able to get food where it needs to be at the time it needs to be there. But as we grow from 7 billion to 9 billion people, that problem's not going to get any easier. So we got to deal with that, but we also have to increase our production. If you want to think about 25,000 deaths per day worldwide from hunger, what's another way to look at that? It's the equivalent of 60 jumbo jets falling out of the sky every day. I always hate to use this example as I'm going to head for the airport later today, but it does give you another visual, another way to think about it, and it highlights the importance of where we need to go. But it's not just the developing world. My guess is not too far from here we could find people that don't have the nutrition or the food that they need to sustain themselves. 2 in 5 people in Great Britain, 1 in 8 in France, 1 in 7 in Japan, and 1 in 5 right here in the U.S. actually don't know where their next meal might come from. So getting the proper nutrition to those folks, and there's a bit of a paradox between obesity and not having enough to eat, and it's about getting the right nutrition at the right time to the right people. Many school children in Indianapolis, for example, about 25% of the school children, when they go home for the weekend, don't know where their food's going to come from because they depend on the school systems to provide their food. So this is an issue not just in far-off places in Africa. This is an issue right here, and I'm sure in Raleigh-Durham. I know it's an issue in Indianapolis as well. In addition to that, when we think about the developing world, there's 3 billion people that are going to move and join the middle class over the next several decades. And the first thing that every civilization in the history of man has done when they get additional dollars is they buy animal source food. Now, I always thought that, hey, that's because it tastes good, right? We like meat, we like milk, we like cheese, eggs, and it's all good stuff. But there's actual studies now where they've looked at Kenyan school children, and when they added just a quarter of a pound of meat to the diets of those school children, they saw dramatic improvements in their test scores. They saw dramatic increases in their leadership behaviors and their activity on the playgrounds, being able to balance their diet and improve their nutrition. It's a virtuous cycle. So they get better nutrition, they score better in school, they develop better leadership, it enriches their life. So that's why people want to improve their nutrition. And we could say, hey, why don't we just go completely to grains? And that would be okay if all we needed was energy. But there are places here where we need to have, it's very difficult to balance a diet in a third world just on grains alone. So adding animal products, and animals in some cases turns nutrients that aren't available into nutrients that are good for people. So this is going to add to the amount of food. So we have to work together, we have to have more grains, we have to have more livestock, and we have to be able to do that. To highlight this even further, in places like China, they want to actually take their people from 100 grams of milk to 300 grams of milk daily. That's still less than half of what the recommended daily intake of dairy is in the U.S. And he called it a dream to be able to have every Chinese have sufficient milk each day. If they do that, it'll take 36 million dairy cows to produce that amount of milk at their current production levels. So if we aren't able to, and in the U.S. we have 9 million cows. So to be able to get to that level of production, the application of technology is absolutely essential. But we talk about technology and we talk about the need for food and we talk about technology as the answer. And I think many of us in this industry would say, well, really, do people want technology? I mean, doesn't everyone want food raised without technology? And I think as a company, Elanco, we had those very same questions. You know, do customers want food raised with the type of technologies that we make? And there's been a lot of research done, and we decided to commission what we call the International Consumer Attitudes Study. And it was a review of studies that have been done over the course of time to look at consumer attitudes. And we had two criteria with which we used to include studies into our data analysis. One, we had to have unaided questions. So if you go out and ask the question, do you want hormones in your meat? That's not an unaided question. And probably the more important one, or the more objective one, is spending data. So what are consumers really willing to spend their money on? When we looked at all of the studies that had been done and we combined them, what we found was there were 28 studies across 26 countries, about 97,000 consumers over a 10-year period. So a pretty good set of data to take a look at and say, hey, what do people really want, or what do people really care about when they make their food choices? What we found was 95% of the people really only care about 3 things, and we call these folks food buyers. They care about taste, they care about cost, and they care about nutrition. Could be somewhat surprising that these are the key things, but the studies actually showed it pretty clearly. The next group, so you may be recognizing back from the napkin, 95 and 4. The next group is called a lifestyle buyer, and they do want luxury, gourmet, organic, local, and gardens. And what's very interesting about this group is really when we look at the 95 and the 4, what we found is there's a very blurred line between those two. That many of us, including myself, I have some areas where I'm more in the luxury buyer. I like a Starbucks coffee every once in a while. That's not a food buyer type of activity. In that part of my life, I'm more of a lifestyle buyer. And I think that's, these areas and these things are great. And what we would support is people need the choice. They need to have the choice to buy the types of foods that they want But we also have to recognize that to feed 9 billion people, some of these things probably won't support that. So what we would say is when we look at 99%, so the 95% that are food buyers and the 4% that are lifestyle buyers, and we look at that 99%, what they want is they want food that has taste, that is affordable, and that is nutritious, and they want to have the choice to buy the types of foods that they want. And I think that's the 99% that we can support. There's 1% left. We've called them the fringe. And the difference with this group is they want to make the choice for other people. Through food restrictions, food bans, and propositions, they want to take choice away. And what we would support is that however people want to raise their food, we need more food, we want people to have the choice. You know, we want to be able to produce products that can go into organic programs, for example. But we have to be very careful when we start imposing our will or our choices on other people. That's when we think things start to come and go awry. So the first study, the consumer attitude study, was a retrospective. So we said, let's look at the data that's already been collected. And it had, some of it went back 10 years. So we wanted to say, does this still ring true today? If we looked, and this was in 2010, in October of 2010, we actually did a prospective study in the U.S. to see if these numbers still held. And what we found was exactly the same thing. 98% of the people buy their food or make their food decisions on taste, cost, and nutrition. So the data still holds together very well, and the most important elements, again, are consumers that want to buy food that's going to taste good, it's going to have the right cost, and it's going to provide nutrition that they're looking for. So you might ask the question, what about organic? You know, we hear a lot about it. It's an important niche. We like I said, are supportive of the organic folks that want to have their food grown organically. About 3% of the food in the U.S. is organic. We see that we do see that growing, 4% by 2014. So it's an important niche, but it's still relatively small. And when we think about, again, meeting their global challenge, it's going to be very difficult to do that without the application of technology. So let's look at some case studies. And I've got Brazil here, but I think Governor Hunt, many of the things that I'll talk about here as Brazil as a case study could be used. We could talk about North Carolina and its emergence as an agricultural powerhouse. But Brazil was a former food importer and now is one of the largest exporters. And you might say, you know, how did it get there? Well, first let's look at what they've done. If you look at Brazil, their total crop production is up since 1996. So 96 to 2006, 365%. 10x in their beef exports. And Brazil has now become the world's largest exporter of beef, poultry, and sugarcane. Well, how did they do it? What were the key ingredients for that? And I think as you think about Ag Biotech and growing that in North Carolina, I think many of these same principles can apply. So, okay, it's nice. It's nice in Brazil. They have a great climate. Even probably they don't have the 2 months of winter that we get here in North Carolina. They don't have in Brazil. They've also got great natural resources. But probably more importantly, they have entrepreneurial leadership. They've had entrepreneurial leadership. They've embraced technology, and they've had pro-agricultural policies, much as you've done here in North Carolina, Governor Hunt. And I think that's how you actually grow and how we'll meet this challenge is by encouraging things in that way and by promoting choice. If we take choice away, there's other examples. So if we look at an example where choice was taken away, when I was in my first year of my master's program at Michigan State, I took a food marketing course. So this was in the mid-1980s. 90% of every person that walked out of a grocery store had a can of Campbell's soup in their bag, which I thought was amazing. But Campbell Soup made a decision to actually only offer low-sodium soups. And what happened to their market share was it started declining very, very rapidly. And they've actually completely had to reverse that decision and now offer both. And they've been able to stabilize and have those things, have their market shares continue to grow. Restricting choice can have even more dramatic effects. So we talk about golden rice and vitamin A deficiencies and how that can impact the the health of children. So by being afraid of some of these technologies that have been proven to be safe and effective, we can have very dramatic impacts on people's health and people's lives. But I think things are starting to change, and you start to see things even in the European Union where folks will talk about, and this is one of the key leaders in the European Union, that farmers in the EU must be allowed to choose the tools they need to thrive, and our citizens must be free to select from the widest variety of food choices made possible by our modern food production enterprises. So people are starting to understand that choice is a key element, even in some of these areas that have been very difficult from a technology perspective. So we talked about food and the importance of food. We talked about choice and the importance of choice and what consumers are really interested in. The last thing I think we need to make sure that we highlight is that we've often talked about sustainability. And I think often we connect sustainability with more extensive or farming that looks more like our grandfathers than it looks like today. And what I would tell you is that technology is the key to sustainable agriculture. And what technology allows, it allows farmers to grow more food with greater efficiency, to feed more people, to consume fewer resources in the production of that food, and generate less waste. So when we think about technology and its interaction with the environment, we're already over the projections are that we're already producing at a rate that exceeds the production capability long-term of our planet. We have to use technology to be able to sustainably produce food as we go into the future. Is it possible? What progress have we made? If you think about the progress that I showed on the previous slide with total agricultural output, we can use a couple more examples that can help show how environmentally sustainable the application of technology is. Some of the thought leaders talk about freezing the footprint of agriculture, a footprint of food, if you will. So again, it's back to how do we take what we have, how do we produce what we need, and technology is key to that. So how are we doing? I think if we look since 1944, producing a gallon of milk today requires 65% less water, 90% less land, and produces 76% less manure than it did in 1944. So huge advances have been made in our ability to produce milk, for example, and this is just one example, in a much more sustainable way through the application of technology. We can use this, and finally, a 63% smaller carbon footprint of milk production. We can look at similar examples. This is just the last 30 years, and if we look, or 35 years, if we look at each pound of beef produced in the U.S., today requires 14% less water, 34% less land, and compared to 1977, beef produced today generates 20% less manure than it did just some 35 years ago. Its carbon footprint is 18% smaller. So we're making huge advances, and we need to continue to make those advances as we go forward. So when we think about technology, it really does enable these three rights. It enables the right to food. We have to produce more food. It enables the right for people to choose. So we talked about the 4%, the lifestyle buyers. If we don't have technology, we won't have the ability to choose the types of things that we want to eat. And it really does enable sustainability, which is environmentally right as we go forward. So kind of in conclusion, we can look out and see storm clouds in the distance. I think when we look about grain stocks are low, food prices are high, the population is climbing fast. We believe that the current conditions with where we've been with the economy and where we're at today, there is here a window of opportunity for us to talk and move boldly forward, and that need is urgent. I think when we talk about the mountain that we need to climb, when we talk about how do we make technology more accessible and more available around the world, it's the people in this room, the leaders in this room, that have to be able to talk about these things and actually help change the opinion of people that want to that need this technology to produce the food that we need as a planet. So what would I ask? A couple of things. I'd say personalize the issue. You know, each of us that work in this industry, you know, I think historically we've been a little shy about talking about what we do. What we do is critically important. It's going to be critically important going into the future. Engage the food chain. You know, our food chain continues to consolidate. Smaller and smaller number of people are in charge of those of that food chain. Making sure that these messages are there and available to the food chain is absolutely important. And then we need to support the 99%. You know, we need to support choice. We need to support technology and allow people to buy the food in the ways that they need to buy it. If you need more resources, there's a blog called plentytothinkabout.org. You can join the conversation there if you're a blogger. You can download the copy of the white paper, which is also available in the back. There's also a short video on making safe, affordable, and abundant food a global reality if you're interested in that as well. And then finally, you know, join the conversation. You know, it is a time for action. We talk about technology enabling the three rights of food choice and sustainability.